Um, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hao Huang, Assistant Professor of Social Sciences, and welcome to Illinois Tech Social Sciences Great Problems, Great Minds Seminar Series. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like you to know you can submit questions during the webinar by typing in the chat box. We will open the floor to questions at the end of the webinar. Now I will introduce today's speaker, Dr. Clio Andris. So Dr. Clio Andris is an associate professor in the schools of City and Regional Planning and the School of Interactive Computing at Georgia Tech. She directs the Friendly Cities Lab and conducts research on mathematical models of social networks, social flows, and interpersonal relationships, applying to issues of urban planning, visualization, transportation, and geography. Her lab is a member of the Center for Spatial Planning, Analytics, and Visualization, and the Information Visualization Lab. She has published the research articles intensively in top journals such as the Journal of the American Planning Association, Computers, Environment, and Urban Systems, and the International Journal of the Geographic Information Systems. She received a PhD from MIT in 2011 in Urban Information Systems, where she was a National Defense Science and Engineering Fellow and a member of the Sensible City Lab. She holds postdoc positions at the Singapore MIT Alliance for Research and Technology and at the Central Institute. Prior to Georgia Tech, she was a faculty member in the Department of Geography at Pennsylvania State University. And her lab was an affiliate of the Geophysical Center. She won an NSF Career Award in 2021. It's very glad to welcome Dr. Clio Andris.
Thank you, Dr. Huang, for such a kind introduction. I see we have a relatively small group today, and I personally am very happy to see that because it makes things a little more community oriented. So I would like to invite all of the participants here today to stop me at any time, ask questions. I may not be able to see the chat while I'm talking, so just unmute yourself and say, hey, I got a question, or I got a comment, or I need a clarification. So thank you so much for having me today, and I will go ahead in just a second here and share my screen and get started. All right, how is it looking? Good?
Looks great.
Thank you. All right, so my talk today is entitled Social Spatial Network Analysis. And here's an outline for my talk. I'll talk a little bit about analyzing geospatial networks, give you a little background on some spatial social network stories, new research examples, how to create community, and a conclusion. And again, please, just stop me at any point. Okay. Usually analyze geographical networks. So I really like this example. It's called Revisiting John Snow's Map, a network-based spatial demarcation of the cholera area. This comes from John Snow's original seminal study on the pumps in London and looking at who got sick with cholera based on what pumps may have been contributing to this. That study uses Euclidean distance, and it tends to have us look at things like people would draw a straight line to the pumps. But if you are using the roads where people and the paths where people would usually walk, you may get a different answer of the demarcations of which households used with which kind of pumps. When we usually analyze networks in geographic space, it tends to be on a road system. Here's another example of analyzing different phenomenon or themes using a road grid. For example, robberies, drug incidences, burglaries, or theft from vehicles. So when we put these on a road, instead of looking at like Euclidean distance, and we use that network analysis, we can cluster things a little differently. Another thing that we do in geospatial analysis of networks is we use great visualization tools to look at flows of origin destination matrices. So here's an example of a new tool called Flow Mapper from flowmapper.org. And this team has put together some really, really great tools to help you visualize your own data on origins and destination networks. So on the left here, we have looking at banana trades between countries in South America. And on the right here, we have an example of migration flows between different states in the United States, given different points in time. So these are some ways that geographers analyze networks, usually on roads or transportation, or we analyze big flows of origin destination networks. So I'm trying to do something a little bit different. I'm looking at smaller social networks. And my idea is that these tiny social networks, the social networks that evidence interpersonal relationships and systems, they really count on geography. So they look at, or we look at how a network might be embedded in geographic space. So what is an example of a small social network? This is an example from Jacob Moreno from 1934 in his kind of book or manuscript, Who Shall Survive? A New Approach to the Problem of Human Interrelations. And this would be called a sociogram. In this particular example, again, from the 1930s, there's a class structure of first graders. There's 21 boys and 14 girls. The boys are here in the triangles and the girls are over here in the circles. And we can see that the boys tend to interact with the other boys quite a bit. The girls tend to interact with the other girls quite a bit, which makes for this kind of what we call homophily in a social network. We can also see that there is one person in class who a lot of people chose as being their friend or interacting with this person the most. It calls this attractions, but we can think of them just as like edges. And when we see an arrow here, it means that that person mentioned that other person. So that child mentioned that other child. So we see an issue of homophily here. And we also see that some people, maybe a couple, are emerging as really more popular students in the classroom, while others are a little bit on the periphery. So let's take a look at how social networks might be guided by geography. So take a look at this kind of pretend example. You may have people in your life who you know through like a religious institution, or you may have people you play with on a softball team, or you're with in a night class. You may also have people you know from work, and then your family, like an aunt, uncle, or your brother. You may have these different modules of people that you interact with and that are part of your social network. So we think like, what is the role of geography in this social network? You might meet at the religious institution. You might need the softball field to play. You might need some organization to do a night class. Either you go there or you're online. And you also need institutional ties for work. So we want to say, like, if this social networks were embedded in geographic space, what would we learn about how the way the built environment is set up and how the way the physical environment is set up that curates and allows for these relationships or that might hinder relationships? So our research goal is to provide tools, methods, and measurements for relatively small spatial social networks. We have 3 sub-goals. First is to answer basic research questions about spatial social networks. And I'll just say here that a spatial social network can be defined as any social network where the nodes are embedded in geographic space. So when the nodes have any sort of geography. We want to provide tools to tell better stories about social networks, how they evolve and why they are like the way they are, and also to test hypotheses in social networks. A potential hypothesis would be that this ancient trading network between villages, maybe they didn't trade much because there was a river that went between the villages, or that the villages didn't trade much when there was a mountain range between them. We also want to make it easy for people to map and explore their spatial social networks. So those are our overarching goals. I'll go over now some best practices and some spatial social networks that we have not created. This is sort of our literature review, but that we really, really liked seeing, and it really inspires us to keep going with this topic. This is the first early example from a team of sociologists in North Carolina, and they have a long-going project in the Nang Rong district of Thailand. And so one of their projects here was to look at different communities and in this district in Thailand, and to look at the relationships between the communities. So in this example, we have a bunch of villages and we have tractor sharing between the villages. And by putting land use data and by geographically referencing this social network and putting land use or land cover data underneath it, we can learn more about tractor sharing. We find that villages with greater amounts of land in upland agriculture, so that includes sugar and cassava, are more likely to both send and receive tractors. Villages with greater amounts of land in rice are less likely to both send and receive tractors. So this relationship between the crop type and the type of agricultural equipment used, along with the uneven distribution of crops, can really tell us a little bit more about why these connections exist and what would happen if the villages moved or they had different types of agriculture, how these connectivity patterns might change. So putting that land cover data underneath this network gave us a new understanding of how geography curates that network. Another example is in rural social networks along the Amazonian River. Seeds, labor, and soccer among communities on the Napo River in Peru. So the nodes here are rural villages, and the edges are three different types of connections. Seeds, so seed sharing, cooperative labor, so that's, you're working together, and then soccer tournaments. And so we can see that when we have seed sharing, there's sort of a big chain that connects a lot of these villages. So we would think that if one village stopped this connection, stopped sharing the seeds, it might really affect a lot of other villages. With cooperative labor here, we can see that the connections are not as chain-like or not as star-like. They're kind of small and they're dyadic, and they might have triads or smaller groups. So a break in one village's participation might not affect the other villages as much. This soccer tournament network really engages a lot of these different nodes. And it's clear that having a soccer tournament can bring a lot of the villages together. A lot of them participate in the villages, and it is all of the villages are connected through soccer playing. The magenta communities here are in Mazan. The communities are cyan communities are in Napo, and the yellow communities are in Torres Casana. So the different color lines denote linkages across these different districts. When we map these villages out, we get to see even more important things about their geography. So we can see in this study area, the different villages and how they connect and how they're focused or they're situated along the water bodies here. And we can see the soccer linkages with their most important soccer partner. They tend to have some longer ties. So it's not just the most important soccer partner is not just who's nearby, even though there are a lot of nearby ties. The cooperative labor has a lot more local connections. So you don't see these widespread, you don't see these kind of more distant connections with the cooperative labor networks. They tend to be a little bit more local. But you could argue that most of these are local, and that these villages tend to interact with villages that are quite nearby them. And when you see a red village, it means they're interconnected. And you see a black village, it means it's not connected. So, or in this regard, that they're not connected. So there are a number of villages that are close by, but they are not integrated into this one network. A final example of some research that we really like in this field is a spatial social network analysis of resource access in rural South Africa. So this is showing This is showing different households in South Africa and whether they are sharing between them different supplies, like wood resource access here is in red with arrows, and wood and water exchange between houses is in blue. And sometimes, in some regards, there is sort of a core periphery model here, where the villages that are very close to each other and are close distance, they tend to share the wood and water together, whereas the exchanges for wood resources tend to be on the periphery. In this model, that's not showing that. It's showing that the wood exchanges and the wood access are really what's gluing this network together. On the right side, we can see how this network is mapped on top of an orthophoto, and on top of imagery, it gives us a different kind of view. So we can see that the households are exchanging money, exchanging labor, exchanging food, exchanging disease information, not necessarily with just their local partners, so not necessarily with just their local households, but they're connecting across the field in the middle. So it doesn't show that that distance or travel across different types of land cover is an impeding factor to connecting. And so that's really interesting to see here, that when we lay the social network on top of geographic space, we can better understand that the connections aren't necessarily being stopped by whatever features are in the middle. Here for a second and ask to see if anybody has any questions or comments. All right, I'll move on now to new research examples. So the first example I'll see is a case study of the 1960s mafia network in New York City. So the nodes here are mafia members, and the edges are mafia members' criminal associations called known associates. We got this data from our collaborator, Daniel Della Posta, who got it from archival data from the Bureau of Narcotics dossier. So here we have an example of someone from a dossier. This is Big Frank. He was born in 1913. We have his address, so where he resides in San Diego. We have his family background, and we have some of his criminal associates as well. And so from this, we get a geography for this agent, and we also get connections that he has. We focus a little bit on New York City here. We find that it has 298 nodes and 936 edges. So here's an example of what the mafia network looks like as a sociogram. Each member is a dot, and the dot is larger if it has more connections, if he has more connections. The dot is colored by the family that that node is in. So for example, you might be part of the LA family, or the San Francisco family, or the New England family, or the St. Louis family, or one of the 5 largest families in New York City. This is a 680 member network. It includes 2,699 edges. The average degree is about 7, meaning that on average, someone has about 7 friends. The average path length, which is the hops between networks, is 3.88. Before moving on, it's also worth highlighting the uniqueness of this pocket here that represents the 5 different families of New York City. So the 5 New York City families were the Genovese family, the Lucchese family, the Gambino, Profaci, and Bonanno organizations. And together, they comprise 46% of all individuals in the network. Here's that network mapped out, where each dot is an agent in this mafia network, and each edge here means that they were known criminal associates. When you have a cross-family tie, that is all gray. These are cross-family ties are in gray, and same family ties are in orange. Across family ties mean that these 2 people have different families and are working for these different kind of sub-organizations, but they're tied together. When you see a tie or an edge here that is orange, it means that they're in the same family. This is in contrast to a really cool map that was made in 1963 as a Senate committee report on the interstate drug trade, which showed a well-connected network of narcotic distributions. So it suggests some top-down coordination. So we see that people from different parts of the country are part of this drug trade, and that there's a lot of connections between cities, more so than intra-cities. And this is able to list some people who are involved in this narcotics trade. A lot of these members in this map are also found in our data set. We are seeing too that there's a big heroin trade in Miami, and they're getting cocaine from Central and South America. And this map also includes parts of Canada, which our map does not include. So one of the research questions we have for this network is that once a network grows, it may become denser spatially, but more sparse in other ways. So larger family networks are less tight, and this relationship is very good, is captured pretty well by a power law fit, and the R squared of this is 0.83, which is quite high. So family size is a mixed indicator of member spatial dispersion, as a regression against the standard distance has resulted also in a power law fit with R squared of 0.26 and 0.11. So the research question here that we're interested in is, are families tight-knit socially, geographically, or both? Each dot here represents one of the mafia families. The bigger the dot is, it means it had more members in it. So the Genovese family with well over 100 members is the biggest dot. And when you see a dark blue dot, it means that it's one of the New York Big Five families. So on the x-axis, we have what we call network density. This means how clique-like is the network. Does everyone in the network know each other, and does everyone in the network connected to one another? We have a clique, a perfect clique, meaning everyone in the network is connected to each other. Everyone in the family is connected to each other. With this example of Omaha, we have very, very sparse connections with these New York families. That's notable, or excuse me, that's understandable because these are very, very big collections of people. But when you have the Profaci family down here, this family is a bit smaller, but still has really sparse connections. So that's what's on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have something called standard distance. And that's something that we know quite well in geography. And that means how far does this family spread? What is their kind of spatial span? And when we have values up here, high, dispersed values, it means they're spread all over the place. And when we have clustered values here, it means that all these people are really close by. So the standard distance is less than 100 kilometers for most of these, well, I won't say most, but a lot of these families here. And when you're in this quadrant of this scatter plot, it means that you're all very close by, but you don't know each other. If you're in this quadrant of this scatter plot, it means you're really dispersed, but you do know each other. So both of these are sort of anomaly situations, and we would expect the trend to go downward like this. And again, the trend does go downward like this, and it does have a power law fit of 0.83 R squared. So let's take a look at what the St. Louis network might look like. So here's where St. Louis is on this chart, and here's where the St. Louis agents are in the city of St. Louis. So when you see a line between them, it means that they're known associates. There's some lines in the background, we call those flyover lines. So those are just indicating that, excuse me, that there's people on one side of the country and people on the other side of the country that have ties, and those are just on the map. When you see kind of these lighter pink lines, and I know that's really hard to distinguish between the darker pink and lighter pink, I got a little pink happy, but it means that those agents have connections that are outside St. Louis. So this is where the people are located. Again, they're in all of the people in this family are right in the city. They're circled around the center of the city, but not all of them know each other. For example, these two people here, Ralph and Vincent, they do not know each other, but yet they're pretty close by. Another research question we have is, do powerful members live near the geographic center of their families? So this plot allows us to see the answer to that question. We have high and low degree members here. An example of a high degree member is John Ormento. He has a degree of 77, and so he has the most connections in the network. When you have the agents that are down here, it means that they are very, very close to the median center of their family. So this means that it's very easy for them to access the other, members of their family. When you have members over here, it means that they were kind of sent away from the family. whether to do business or for some sort of nefarious reason, like Joe Bonanno over here. He was kind of exiled from his family. These cluster of people are Miami-based agents. So they're from New York families, and they went down to Miami to do trading and to work on the industry there. Michael Coppola is an example of a Genovese family member who's very high ranking, and he was sent to Miami. So the question of, do powerful members live near the geographic center of their family? The answer is a bit, yeah. And the colors don't mean anything here, but it tends to be that these higher ranking members tend to be closer to their families. So the next question is, where are connected clusters located? And we're geographic analysts, so we like to look at different types of spatial analysis methods to answer this question. So here is the methods that we do. We invented or kind of created two new scan statistics, which rove all over the map, called edge scan and ND scan, network density scan. So both of these algorithms take in a node list and an edge list. And for each node in spatial social networks, it calculates focal statistics, which means you can think of this a little bit like a Roomba, kind of going around, roving around, and it collects its nearby neighbors, and then it gives it a value. It scooches over, it collects its nearby neighbors, gives it a value, etc. So it comes out with a smooth answer. Here's an example of what a focal window looks like. You might have a Euclidean distance here of 400 meters, Manhattan distance of 500 meters, and K nearest neighbors of 7. So this agent right in here has 7 neighbors within this focal window, or I'm sorry, this agent here could have a focal window of 40 meters, 400 meters Euclidean, 500 meters Manhattan, or its 7 nearest neighbors. Those are 3 different ways to say, what does your neighborhood look like? Most basic analysis to do at this point would be to do the count. So how many neighbors do you have at these distances? The answer to this one would be like 8. When we want to do edge scan, we're not looking for the number of nodes. We're looking actually for the number of edges. So how many edges exist within this neighborhood? And we also want to say, well, if you have more nodes, you're going to have more edges. So it's not really a fair statistic. So we also calculate the network density within this kind of focal circle. So our network density is 2 times the number of edges divided by the nodes times the number of nodes minus 1. And that's how we get the network density. This is a very normal way of calculating network density. It says, how many edges do you have over how many edges could you possibly have? So these are some of the answers that we came up with. We did this in New York City because that's where we have the densest groups of people. So instead of just wanting to find, again, dense groups of nodes, like most spatial analysis does, we're looking for groups of connected nodes. So our statistics yielded high numbers for Little Italy, East Harlem, West Bronx, Dyker Heights for the edge scan. And for the ND scan, we also found that we had high values in Dyker Heights, Little Italy, Flushing, West Bronx, and East Bronx. We notably our scan statistics didn't pick up this group over here, didn't really pick up this group over here. There's a number of close dots that don't come up in our statistics because although they're close, they're disconnected. So we're only looking for cells of connected nodes. We compared this to kind of a more canonical way of doing point pattern analysis, which is the Geddes or GI statistic, which looks for clusters of points. So this statistic found that these two regions over here, C and D, this D is covered a little bit, sorry, but C and D were indeed hotspots, but it wasn't able to really find the other hotspots, even though when we use our method, those pop up as being very important. So this kind of tries to illustrate that if you want to find instances of connected nodes, you can't really use the statistics that are out there because they'll give you different results. We also did a sensitivity analysis on this, meaning that as you change the neighborhood, how do your results change? For example, here are some Mafia members that are living in Diker Heights. This is a Profaci family, and this is Giuseppe, excuse me, Giuseppe Profaci, who is the highest ranking member in that area. When you see a orange line here, it means that those were friends at 2 kilometers. When you see a blue line, it means that those were friends at 1 kilometer, or not friends, but connected. So you can see how the number of connections you have might change really significantly based on how you're defining that neighborhood. So here's results of a sensitivity analysis that we have. So when we change the window size in the neighborhood definition, we might get different results. So if we have Euclidean distance at these different distances, Manhattan distance at these different distances, and their K nearest neighbors at 5, 10, and 20, our results change quite a bit. So the mean of the edge scan can be as low as about 3 when we have a really small Euclidean distance. But when we search for the 20 nearest neighbors, which might be far away, it's over 10 times that much, over 11 times that much. And then the mean and standard deviation of the node density scan, it doesn't have that kind of range because, again, we're normalizing it under the possible number of edges it has. So this one tends to stay a little bit more stable, but it's lowest for the Euclidean distance of 2 kilometers, and then it's going to be highest for these K nearest neighbors. This is quite generous to give you your 10 nearest neighbors, because it might exist over a water body, go to Staten Island, something like that. So doing a sensitivity test is important because it shows us how much our answers are going to vary based on how we do that, how we define that neighborhood. I'll go through 2 more brief research examples, and then I'll show how we're trying to create community in this field. So my next research example is a case study of a mentorship network. So we have data from Big Brothers Big Sisters. We've got 6,200 pairs, about 6,300 pairs. And Big Brothers Big Sisters is a nationwide mentorship project, and it pairs someone in the community, like an adult in the community, with a little. So the adult is called the big, the mentee is called the little, and the littles can range basically, I think, from about 5 to 17 years old, maybe even 5 to 18. And you get matched together and you do different activities with your kid. So you might take them to the park, you might take them to the zoo, you might hang out and do their homework, take them out to eat, etc. And depending on, depending on the city you live in, there's different opportunities to do that. So we have data on the home location of the big and the little for 7 different cities. So here's what it looked like in Philadelphia. This P means protege, the M means mentor. We are working with somebody who has bigger vocabulary than I do. So that's why we have those colors there. But the littles, so the kids that were being mentored, are the orange dots, and the bigs are the blue dots. And this is an example of Philadelphia. So we can see here that the kids, so the littles, live in areas with lower per capita income than the bigs. You can see it's kind of a big, pretty stark difference depending on what part of the city you're in. But we do see a little bit of a core periphery model here. And then we do see that there are some people from the suburbs who are interested in participating, but that a lot of the bigs come from the inner city. Here are the examples, the same kind of data for Philly, again, Houston and Dallas, where the little is red and the big is in blue. And then we have, again, per capita income here as a choropleth map in the background. Houston has a big core periphery model, or it has kind of a circular model. Dallas tends to have that too, but not to the same extent. And then we also have 4 more cities. Denver, which was our most mixed results, I think, were in Denver. It wasn't super as clear, but LA, you can see an area with a lot of littles, and then around it, a lot of bigs. Kansas City was extremely, extremely stark. So this is called Troost Avenue here. It's a big, it's a street that has a lot of segregation on either side. It's a very segregating street. And you can just see it's pretty amazing here how all the bigs are located on this one corridor, all the littles are located on this other corridor. And then there's just ties switching across that. And I'll just pause here and say, segregation is not good. and such stark segregation means that bad stuff has happened in the past. And when you want to say, hey, we need to have relationships on either side, you need institutions like this to be able to do that. Tampa, you can see that down in St. Pete here, you've got some bigs, you've got some littles, and generally this one also didn't follow a specific kind of pattern, but generally you can see that the littles live in lower income areas than the bigs. We had some trouble visualizing this because it's really hard to visualize spatial social networks sometimes, but here are just a couple more visualizations of what that looks like. Research question behind this was, is this institution, is Big Brothers Big Sisters putting together ties that wouldn't have happened by happenstance? So that was our question. So are they bringing people together at a farther distance than random? Are they bringing people together at a farther travel distance than random? And we also have something called allometric distance that we created for this model, which was a very exciting thing, which was that we don't really care about travel time or distance, but how many people are in between you. We found that to be a really interesting way of measuring distance. So our hypothesis here was that that Big Brothers Big Sisters brings together people from all across the city, and it weaves them all together, takes them to neighborhoods they wouldn't have been to before, takes them all over the place. And that it crosses administrative boundaries, that it doesn't look at the commuting patterns, and that it also bridges places that have really different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I'll give you a little table here. This is the last slide I have on this case study. This is too many numbers to read. The results are too small to read, but I'll go through them one by one. So we have Dallas, Denver, Houston, Kansas City, LA, Philly, Tampa, and here's all cities. We were wrong about all of our distance metrics. We were wrong about Euclidean distance, travel time, travel distance, and allometric distance. People did not go further than random. And what do I mean by random here? I mean, we did a permutation. So we rewired all of these pairs randomly and to create a simulation of about 1,000 times as many as we expected. Actually, yes, 100 times as many as expected. So what we did is we rewired them randomly, and we said we computed the metrics for the random pairs, and then we computed the metrics for our pairs. And all of ours were much, much, much closer together than the randomness. So we were wrong on that. And it turns out that Big Brothers Big Sisters does like to match people who are close by. Makes a lot of sense when you're picking up and dropping off your little. Crossing administrative boundaries, we looked at county lines for this. We wanted to do school districts, but it wasn't available to us for all cities. No dice here. They weren't more or less likely to cross administrative boundaries. So there wasn't like that whole like stigmatized, like, oh, I don't want to have a little in this county versus that county. We didn't find any evidence of that whatsoever. Regarding the commuters, we didn't find evidence of it following commuter networks, these ties following commuter networks, except for we had a little bit of evidence of it in Tampa. Excuse me. The socioeconomic neighborhoods we were correct on. We definitely were correct on that. So our hypothesis was correct there. These do bridge much different socioeconomic communities in terms of median household income, which you saw from the maps, percent which bachelor's degree, percent unemployed, and percent African American. So that's not surprising given the mission of this, but it was nice for us to be able to test this. There were a couple of cases, or at least one case, where it wasn't really a statistically significant answer, and that was in Los Angeles. Difference in percent African American did not have a statistical difference. It may be because there were a number of Hispanic students or kids in that group. It may be because we had a lot of Black and African American bigs as well. So that's that project. And I'll have one more slide on our other social spatial project. And then I will talk about our initiative to create community in this field. So this is a fun project. I don't usually talk about it for more than a slide, but I like to show it to academics. I think it's interesting. We looked at romantic relationships in State College, Pennsylvania, where I was living. We did a survey of 124 couples. 31% of the survey filler outer was male. 31 male, 93 female. So 3/4 of the survey respondents were female. And we did this in a range between 2015 and 2020. So the age, the mean age was 23.8, 24 for partners. And so we did get a lot of college students in here. 43.5% were cohabiting, 17 were married, so 13% of the data set. 97% identified as heterosexual, and the duration of their relationship ranged from a month or so to about 12.5 years. And then we were able to map these relationships. So when you see a dot here, it means that you have partners living apart. And when you see a bigger dot or dot with a ring around it, that's cohabitating. So the values here is how often they go to the downtown. And so you can see that for some reason, like a lot of these dots here, they don't go to the blue dots don't go to the downtown very much, but that isn't the fun part of the map. The fun part of the map is getting to see all these relationships that are kind of skirting the fraternity, sorority areas and looking at, where the students are living, where they're going home at night. One of them said, safety is great. My girlfriend can stay over pretty late and go back to her house. They really appreciated the street lights. They really appreciated the sidewalks. A number of students who were dating each other who lived on campus, a number of them lived in the same dorms. So we have high-rise dorms and we have a pair that lived in the same dorm here, same dorm here, same dorm here. And then when you don't live in the same dorm, you live very close by. So we don't have a lot of instances where students are dating each other in different dorms. Basically, if you're assigned to a dorm, you tend to kind of want to date there. The results of this study showed that it was really important for couples to be in nature. They really liked hiking together. They really liked being outdoors together. Their favorite places to go were like the Arboretum and the park. And from this, we made a recommendation to the state college government to have a free bus to go to the hiking trail. They have a free bus right now to go to the ski resort, which goes back and forth all night. I remember living there and seeing that. That bus was empty. So it would be nice to let these students go to that Nittany Mountain hiking area. So this is a cute study, but it's an example of spatial social networks and romance in geographic space. So I'll move down to the next part, and this is the final part. So I'll just talk briefly about how we're trying to create community in making spatial social networks the real, kind of more of a reality. So we have a new project called Snowman, this social network mapping nexus, and we're going to launch this in December 2020. We have a great team of students who's working on this now, and they're just been absolutely wonderful. So about Snowman, we're part of an NSF funded project that's developing an integrated research educational framework for spatial social network analysis. We have a data repository, a research gallery, our tools, and open source spatial social network software. We are calling this a data repository right now, but really it's just a very long lit review. It goes on and on and on. This is just the top of the table of spatial social network examples that we really like. And we're hoping to get data from the people who did this. And we're hoping that they'll let us send researchers to them to work with them to collaborate. We also have some visualizations if you want to go in and just look at some pretty pictures. We have an art tool that is really fantastic. Xiaofan Liang has done an amazing job making this very cool art tool for people to use. We have spatial social network software that Jin has built and is continuing to build. It allows you to put your social network in and take a look at it, what it looks like in geographic space. And here's an example of that Mafia network and how it looks when we put it into this research tool. It's open source, it's just on the web. And she was able to make convex hulls and to show where these different communities lived. Right now, we're working on a new project with that tool with our collaborators, Jamie Edwards from University of North Georgia and Dipto Sarkar, who is at Carleton University in Ottawa. And we're looking at food sharing networks in the South, in the New River Valley area, which is in southwestern Virginia and near Virginia Tech. And so she has this model of these different organizations and they share food. And she has it by county right now. But when we're able to map them in ArcMap, we can see some really nice patterns emerge. And now we're working on that within our tool so we can do some exploratory spatial data analysis with the network nearby and a scatter plot and histograms so we can see some really cool different patterns. We'd be happy to have you join us for creating a Google group so you can get updates, share your own updates, and let us know about conferences, papers, all sorts of things all together. So I'll just go ahead and conclude here. Thanks so much for listening to some of our research. My kind of takeaway for you today is that small social networks have geographies, and we want to work with different disciplines. We need specialized metrics, methods, and tools to support science and the exploration of these networks. And also, lastly, this project is in motion, so please check back with us if you're interested in spatial social networks. And here is my contact information, and a big thank you to some of the students who worked on this and to some of my collaborators.
Thank you so much for Dr. Claire and Andris gave a very interesting talk about how actually inventing social network and especially spatial social network to these different applications. So currently we open to the questions. So I wonder, my first question is about the social network. Actually, you have a social network, and also you look at its geographic distance and social distance. How you see for these, because it seems you have several examples actually show their interactions. So how you see these two factors, they are interact each other?
So how do I see social factors and spatial factors interact?
Social network and the geographic. So the social, you have the socially network and the geographically network. So how actually they are interact each other to affect each of these application activities.
Sure. So what do you mean by geographic network in this regard?
Distance. So you actually mentioned quite a few distances. So here. So and also you have some figures to show the distance relationship with the density, network density. So so how you see these two I would say two dimensions things interact to affect the activities applying to different. Actually, you give quite a few fields today for the applications activities.
Yeah, so basically we think that people are less likely to interact if they're farther away. And if there isn't transportation to bring them together, or if there isn't a points of interest for them to meet in between. So that's kind of our null hypothesis about interaction, spatial interaction.
So, which means, did you see in any case, actually the social is more important, or actually the distance is more important? Because currently when you mentioned like transportation become more advanced technology, so then actually the travel distance become travel time become actually significantly reduced. So then people think maybe geographic distance is not matter as not matter as so then as the social network density as you mentioned. So how you see in different situations these things.
Well, I guess you have to look at the configuration of the spatial network. Like, is it a grid? Is it like flights? Is it a hub and spoke network? And then you look at the configuration of the spatial network. Like, is it scale free? Is it a preferential attachment model? Does it have small worlds or different like hierarchies associated with it? And then convolving those two together, you can get a lot of different permutations of spatial and social network might look together.
Okay, so there's, which means for these different permutations, actually, there's no like a certain activities, actually, some principles or mechanisms, certain mechanisms can apply to certain activities.
Yes, and so we have only hypotheses. An example of another hypothesis, besides the fact that there's friction between two entities here, is that more powerful or better connected entities will be at the middle of the geography. So that is a hypothesis we can test. So that's a possible principle, but we don't know if it exists.
Okay, I see. So which means that's the later work you will work on.
The next network.
Yeah, that's
We're working right now on a food sharing network in Virginia, near Virginia Tech campus. And these places give away food for free, canned food. It's kind of more charitable, like food pantries and food resources for households. And we're looking at how they share food and what the factor of distance is or cities and how they align to do that.
Yeah, I saw
Very
you
excited.
showing. Yeah, I saw you showing the food network in the slides. Could you show that slides again?
Sure, you bet. Okay, so we've got it right here. Let me switch. Here we go. Can you see it all right?
No, I don't think it's this one. So I think it's the last. Yeah, this.
Yeah, these are actually the same network.
Oh, okay.
This is this network that we put it in the model that we have in GIS, and we also then put it in our new web tool that we're building. But yeah, so we have the New River Valley, the words Central Food Bank of New River Valley. The actual acronym just slid out of my head. And then we have Feeding America here of Southwestern Virginia. So those are kind of some of the key players in this network. And then you can see who they all share food with, like the Virginia Tech Kitchen shares food with some people. This place Helping Hands gets food from, again, the Central Food Bank of New River Valley. And so you can see which places only have one connection, which places have many connections. And these two places are really important in that network. And then when we look at it in geographic space, we can see that these two important people, you can't see it from here, but one's in Blacksburg and then one is over here. But we're looking at why we want to create the new software tools is to be able to like unpack this network a little bit better.
I see. And also for your like I noticed like the size probably represent the network the number of network the size probably represent the network density, right? For these like a large, then they have a large connection with different
yeah, so and this one is actually centrality, so how central they are, but that correlates very strongly with how many partners they have.
And also for different colors here is represent different organizations and that's represent or
the colors are the different counties. So we have when you have the red, it's in the one county. When you have the purple, it's in another county. Yeah. So this is the reason I didn't make this graphic. Our collaborator did. She's not a geographer. So once we put it in geography, then we could see the pattern, the geographic patterns a little bit better.
Okay, so which means these for different colors represent different counties.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. If in that case, why not like which means actually is have some like geographic location components in this network, right?
Yeah. So this is the same. This is the network, the same network, same exact network. This is the same network, but we put it on a map.
Oh, okay. So it's possible actually integrate these two, like a geographic, because since different color shows a different location, like integrate with the social network with this map, then actually can see clearly like
Yeah, we could
clusters.
put the counties on here. That would be a good idea.
Okay, I see. Yeah, it's pretty interesting work. And also based on these two maps, the food locations. In food locations case, how you see and the social network and since currently is in two separate maps. So how you see the social network and geographic network, their roles comparison in these food networks.
Well, we think that some of the more popular networks will be in the middle of it, so they're easier to access.
Oh, okay. When you say the popular network, which means it's the network has a larger network density.
Actually, it just means it has more connections.
Has more connections.
Yeah.
Then how different between the connections and the network density?
Related. They're not related in this regard. It's just how many times the food bank, how many food banks it's connected to. So it's not really a measure of density. It's actually just number of friends that the food bank has.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So which means it's just one aspect of your social network that I remember you have could you show that slides have how you measure the social network degrees? That's pretty interesting for your methods.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one you mean.
The methodology, you have a mathematics show like the loads, the age.
Which one is it?
You're showing the mathematics, your methods.
Well, a lot of slides here have methods.
This one. Yeah. So which means for connections, just the count summary statistic here. Is that you mean for that one?
So so what's the I'm sorry.
Just now you mentioned like the connection, right? So for those is just mention the connection instead of the network density, right?
Yeah, right. They're two
So
different things.
here the network density actually is here is showing is clearly given this like network density here. Then for the it's like anti-scale Fokker statistic. So this is how you measure the network density, right? So then I'm wondering like for your connection measurement actually is means it's count summary statistics. So that's the connection measurements.
Yeah, so we could do the same thing. We could run this statistic on the food network and do the scan statistics to find locality. We could do it, yeah.
So, okay, so which means that you have both dimensions for measuring these food networks.
Yeah, we have both dimensions.
Oh, okay. So then for this food location, food networks, so the entire project is to try to solve for the food accessibility issues. Or is to try to solve for the accessibility of food?
That's a great question. You know, we just started this, so we'll have to keep you posted on what we're able to do.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
it's so interesting your work. So
Thank you.
so
Thank you so much.
and also the social network, embedding social network actually is by your talk actually is just to inform people how actually social network can apply in so many different applications. It's
Yeah,
broad.
it's a fun topic.
Yeah. So it's thank you so much for your great talk. So yeah.
Thank you very much for having me. It was really a pleasure to get the chance to get to know you better and to talk to your team or your group a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, take care.